He's angry about mortgages. It's Angry Mortgage. He's swearing. He's cursing loud. He's old. He's opinionated. And he's been doing this so damn long. This program is about mortgages, and this is mortgage advice, but the advice may not apply to your situation. Contact licensed mortgage professionals for specific recommendations before you make decisions about mortgages. You may not agree with Ron, but if you don't, he thinks you're wrong. Oh, and did we say there is a lot of swearing?
Very excited to be here. Jeremiah Shamess, Executive Vice President, Colliers. It's international, right?
Well, it used to be. They just say Colliers now.
Colliers now. It's just Colliers now. Okay.
Yeah, because we're worldwide.
So you're like you're like one of the top land salesmen in the country, right? You're in the group.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know the rest of the cities well, but yeah, we compete against the Vancouver guys, the Montreal guys in our own offices. So yeah.
And you know how the other guys do at other offices a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're in the top bracket.
Yeah. I also sell buildings, so apartment buildings, retail plazas, office buildings.
Land, so, you sell the big stuff.
Yeah.
That's it, the big stuff.
Development land is what I always specialized in originally.
Okay.
Now I have a team of 7. So
now, this is really good, in my opinion, because you're the person at the beginning of everything. You're this is how everything starts, is this, okay? Yeah, sure, you could trade apartment buildings and new owner, or old guy leaves, new guy starts, whatever. Yeah. But if you're in development, you're in the land sale business to develop the properties, you see the whole genesis of what happens in a marketplace. And you've always been in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
For a young guy, like a young, really vital-looking, terrific-looking guy, okay? You're young, okay? So you must have started as a kid.
Well, yeah, I didn't quite start as a kid, but I started in 2009. I was a research analyst first with Colliers, and then eventually I was a sales assistant on a large team that was started by an industrial broker. And then at the time, they wanted to explore development land sales. And so I was one of the first ones on the team to start exploring that. And then eventually a year later, I went off onto my own. And then a few years later, we started at Colliers, the private capital investment group, just to concentrate on the private owner, non-institutional. And from there, kind of the rest is history. But always in the GTA, primarily Toronto and also downtown Hamilton, have done a number of deals as well. Hamilton's a smaller market, but...
Sure, but you've also done deals like on the periphery of the GTA for the industrial side and all that. I remember you talking about them, right?
Well, I did. I've never done industrial.
Okay.
We did just bring on someone onto the team who specializes in industrial land. He came from a private equity firm, so we are starting to expand that case there. But primarily what I've always done is representing owners and selling development land and buildings in Toronto.
You did one of the biggest deals this year just recently, right?
Yeah, second largest deal this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah, just under $30 million, and that's small for this year. I mean, we're in a major correction of a market, but getting one of the larger deals over the goal line in Toronto still feels good.
Oh, in this market?
Yeah.
Sweet Jesus, yes, it's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you've got guys in your office who've been around for a while, right?
Yeah.
Guys in their 50s, old farts like me. So they must tell you this reminds them of the 1990 thing, right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, one of my mentors in the business, he was very active in the 90s, and he'd left, he started his own family office, but he used to tell us, the stories of what would happen in the 90s and how they would pick up their phone and try to figure out what's going on, and mostly working with the lenders and the lawyers and the banks at the time because everything was going bankrupt.
Yeah, it was. It absolutely was. We don't think everything's going bankrupt this time, but we'll touch on it. There's a few receivership things. So again, the beauty of it is you see this whole, and you've been through the heyday, you've been through the absolute massive successful bubble of all that, and you see it from the beginning. You figure out, You find the land that and I guess you were telling me you have to solicit the shit out of some of these guys to sell something, right? Like they just, some of the old timers just sat on a perfect parcel of land in Toronto endlessly and just sort of waited for pitches. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. There's still a number of them still waiting.
Still sitting.
Yeah. And
maybe they waited too long.
They did, yeah. Arguably. Yeah, it's quite funny, Ron, actually, because when I started in the business, I used to walk the streets with binders of land ownership, and I would walk through, look at a building, and actually write down who it is, what it was, and was it under construction, was it not? And so I have these binders and binders of ownerships. Mainly it was in the 416, so Toronto core. And then eventually, I started tracking downtown Hamilton and certain boroughs and certain cities as well with the team. But yeah, you have to find what is out there because, effectively you become a market maker. You become a source of information for your clients. So, and I've always represented sellers of real estate, so the owners. And so being on the sell side and exclusively representing that seller, you have to talk to them first before someone else, obviously, and you have to show value because ultimately you're just trying to show them as many options on the purchase as possible and trying to drive the value and get to them what they want, really.
What I find fascinating is you, speaking to you earlier before the show came on, you were able to say, I knew what was going to happen months sooner than everybody else did because I could watch the pattern of development slow down long before anybody called a top in real estate in Ontario. So relate a little bit of that. You're in the middle of 2021 and what started to happen?
Yeah, so we had just pitched an institutional backed developer on a parcel of land. They had decided they wanted to sell this land. They had a fund that was closing. They had a close-ended fund. And effectively what that means, they had a pool of capital of investors who just, wanted to wrap things up and move on to something else. So they had this one last asset in their property group and they called us up and asked us to do a valuation on it. We sat down on the valuation. And that valuation was based on a number of land sales we had just done and buyers we were talking to. And we always have, roughly 20 to 30, land sites in the market at any one time. So we have a lot of information coming in. And then so we represented this seller and went to market. And this was about October to November 2021. And it kind of the process went a little bit slower and ended up into the end of 2021. And I remember thinking, when we were getting the bids in from the different buyers, thinking, well, wait a second, this isn't as many as we expected. And the pricing is maybe off about 10%. And then we started talking to a lot of buyers and seeing exactly what their sentiment was. And we quickly realized that the party was over. And I remember sitting there talking to my AVP at the time, Miles, and I remember, mentioning to him, I really think this is it. This is the end. And this is, the end of our bull market. It doesn't necessarily mean...
It's not the end of real estate.
It was not the end of the real estate market, but yeah, it was very notable at that time that you saw people continued to be more and more sensitive, and you had this kind of deflationary effect in the assumptions that they made in trying to buy real estate. And there were still a few notable sales in very good locations, but mostly from Q3 2021, you saw this deflation until the end of 22, and then in 23 it really dropped off a cliff.
So we saw the market top as, people involved in residential sales of houses and mortgages. We saw that as like March 22.
Yeah.
So you were a full 6 or 7 months ahead of seeing what was really, maybe 8 months ahead. You saw it happen. Okay.
Yeah. And it's because land is ultimately, Ron, the start of, as you mentioned, of everything. So it is kind of interesting because you do get to see, okay, what is going to be built many times before the public sees that. And you see what is the person who is actually initiating the build. What are they going to do? Where are they looking? How do they want to do it? So it's kind of fun in that respect.
But it was a great bull run while it was happening. So when would you say the real bull run started?
That's a good question, but I can tell a great story in late 2016, Q4 2016, Q1 2017. I sold the corner of Church and Wellesley. So it was
great corner.
It was right downtown Toronto, downtown east.
Yeah.
It was a high-rise site. It had some tricky zoning, but they thought it was around about 300,000 feet. So big tower, 30-story tower. And when we went to market for that, we had 17 offers on our bid day.
Oh, 17 offers.
Yeah, 17. And we ended up selling it for, at the time, very big price, over 30 million. And that property at the time, was considered kind of the best of the best as far as, there were some other sales, of course, but that's what everyone wanted. Point Tower downtown, close to subway, close to amenities.
Lots of amenities.
Yeah, right next to Yonge Street.
Beautiful.
Right, and a few towers that had been built next door. So it was kind of, proof of the pudding to what the bull market was at the time.
And then a full 5-year run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that arguably the bull market did start somewhere around probably Q3 2015. And the reason why it started then is that excuse me, developers started to realize in Q3, Q4 in 2015, any project that we're launching, we had very strong demand. So if they're able to move through their demand quickly, if they're 50% sold, they're starting to think about what land they can buy and the next project they need and the pipeline they need in order to keep their team going.
So this is condos. So that was the whole story of that 5-year period.
Exactly.
So they knew that their sell through of the pre-construction condo was so brisk that we got to think about the next one.
That's right. Yeah. And I sell low rise land too, and low rise was a little bit different. It kind of reacted, I would say, more consistently to the market because it's harder to find very large tracts of land.
Oh, yeah.
And, a sale that I did close to Burlington, West Burlington in 2013, 2014, we sold to Mattamy, and it was a fairly large deal. It was like $38 million, 60 acres.
That's a lot. That's 60 acres, a lot.
450 homes. Part of it was service, part of it was unzoned. So it was kind of a complex project. And, at the time we had 7 bids on that. And so subdivision land at the time was very consistent. It moved all the way through to 2015. We had been tracking high-rise land since when I started in sales in 2012. And we had been tracking all kinds of parcels and trying to figure out where the market was, but it wasn't as robust a market for land sales until probably 2015, early 2016. And then things really took off. And then in 2017, that was a very, very big year for development land sales. $7.2 billion of residential land the GTA sold. Wow. Yeah, over 400 transactions. And then the 2 biggest years after that were 2021 and 2022. And the funny thing is, as I mentioned, the market started correcting in 21, but because development land trades typically take, to close anywhere from 6 being the quickest to more likely 12 to 18 months, that's why you still had $8 billion of development land sales in 2022.
They've been contracted before.
Exactly. 554 transactions. And so the buyers were starting to be very careful in that year, but there were still many deals that happened that closed.
Because it's contracted. It's got to close. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as the due diligence goes through, it's got to close. You can't just back out because you didn't like the market.
No, exactly.
So you closed. Now, you mentioned to me, too, that at the time that things were starting to slow down, you suggested to me that a lot of people on both sides, the buy side, the sell side, both sides of the market thought, okay, but this is just going to be a blip. This is just going to be like, it's going to be like 2008. It's going to be like a 8-month, 10-month, 12-month blip, and then everything will be back in place again. But I think you suspected differently, didn't you?
Yeah, it definitely, we were advising clients at the time, take the liquidity when you can now. I'll mention one story in particular. I won't say the location because it's technically still live, but there was an owner of a site in an extremely good location in a 905 area, right? In a downtown node. And he was one of those owners who had never sold anything before. So, generally, and I don't know why I seem to do a lot of this, I like the difficult deals, but the owners who have never sold before, it's a very big psychological push to actually get through the process and agree to look at, what is market value. Sometimes the trickiest part is getting out of their own way. to ultimately what they want. And not in a negative way in particular, just that, it's hard when you've owned something for 30, 40 years and it's been in your family and you're saying, I would like to sell because I want to take the money and do different things, but actually get through the actual process is very tricky. So that's why I swear most of the time I'm a psychologist, but I love reading psychology books to understand how humans think. And so anyways, what happened at this time, it was in 2022, and we were representing this owner as part of this fairly large site. It's about 400,000 square feet, 2-tower site in this downtown node on a corner. Incredible site. And at the time, the market was, say, at, we'll just call it $10. And we were getting offers in the range of $15 to $19. So incredible pricing.
Wow.
And the reason we were able to do that even in 2022 is because this market did not have the same sensitivity as, say, downtown Toronto,
sure,
where land prices were pretty incredibly, inflated at some times, points in time. So we got a number of offers, and ultimately there was 2 groups competing for this site, and ultimately the winner was an institutionally backed, so someone with pension fund money who wanted to build rental.
Okay.
And they wanted an incredible location. So they were bidding this price that really hadn't been seen for unzoned land sales in this area. And we talked through with the owner. We got very close to signing a contract. And ultimately, he pulled back and thought, no, I can get more. And obviously, we still show him all the trades and everything that's in this market. And we explain, listen, here is logically where you are. You are significantly above market. He still wasn't able to sell. And I remember, and my advice to him and a number of other clients was, listen, I believe the market is turning. I've seen it in Toronto, late last year, and this is mid 2022. And I think we are at a point in time where the market is going to take a bit of a sit, a bit of a breather. And this correction could last for some time. And if you're able to take liquidity in a market that's, going down, you may actually be able to have cash in a distressed market, which is the golden rule for how, many, dynasties have been created. They've bought in these downturns. Ultimately, he decided not to do anything. And his site now, which was at one point worth $19, is probably today worth somewhere around, $7. So, 50, 60%, potentially 70% off highs. So, and we had lots of these discussions with owners where we really clearly saw the market turning, but no one quite thought it was true. And to your point, going back to what you mentioned, this will be done in a year and a half, a year, something like that. And like, I have this great book.
That was their thought process. That like, I've watched this value grow so enormously. Yeah, you're making a decent offer, $19 a foot.
Yeah,
is that about right? $19 a foot.
Yeah, it's a hypothetical number.
But that's it was a great number.
Yeah, and
they might have paid 50 cents back in the day. Okay, so it's a huge success.
Yeah,
but they are so amazed. They were so entranced with, and I'm not going to pretend to say that because they thought how smart they were to buy it for 50 cents back in the day, like 25 years ago, but they thought that they've seen the great rise in value, and they became so accustomed to just how much everything went up.
Exactly.
They just assumed it would keep going.
That's
just
right.
Keep going.
If every year, Ron, I come to you and your great tie collection, and I say, Ron, this year I'm going to buy your ties for $100. And you say, no, I don't want to. Next year, Ron, I really want to buy your ties for $200. You're like, no, it's not good enough. And the year after, I'm like, fine, $500. I want your ties. You're like, these things are priceless. So that's
you're going to come back in another month. It'll be $1,000. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. So, it's really not their fault because they were conditioned to think the price is always moving, and they'd never sold anything before. So it was very hard for people to let go.
That's
of things.
a big key. They weren't traders. They weren't traders. They were sitters. They were holders. Yep. And, and it had done so well, right?
Exactly.
It's just done so well. So just keep doing well. All right. So that is fascinating, and that is but in the city itself, like in 416,
yeah,
there's traders. There's people who is it a fair statement to make that some of these parcels did trade hands a few times? Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I just finished selling a receivership. I sold it twice,
You sold it twice. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So the market has completely turned, and there are receiverships.
Yeah.
And you're mentioning there's receiverships at different stages. Like you're mainly doing stuff that's just the land that the deal failed and that got zoned, but it never got built.
Yeah.
And the developer failed. And by the way, these are small developers, folks. I mean, it's not like the big developers in Ontario are going broke. They're not.
A few, but yeah.
A few. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're making me worry now.
Yeah.
But they were mainly like third tier developers. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. It's the smaller guys who are less,
less established. Okay.
Yeah.
So you would sell them the land, and now it went into receivership, and you would sell it again.
Yeah.
What's the markdown? Like, what markdowns are you seeing right now?
For the most case, you could pretty much say from the highs of value, it's roughly 40 to 60%.
40 to 60% down.
Yeah,
Okay,
in value.
In value.
There are a few examples of 70%.
Whoa!
And I'm selling one right now. And it boggles my mind that, certain buyers are still apprehensive, but that's, when you study cycles, you see that most cycles for, very, call it tricky assets like land is the first thing to go.
Yep.
You're looking at, in some cases, incredible discounts. Like in Miami, there was situations where pricing had gone down 95%.
Oh my God. Yeah. But that's a function of some really big changes in Miami, right?
Exactly. That was 2009.
Yeah, the condo collapsed and the laws changed and all hell broke loose.
Exactly.
That's what happened.
I don't think that's what's happening in Toronto. And I think most of the lenders in Toronto are extremely well, I guess, funded in a sense. They're not spending borrowed money. Most of these non-bank lenders are pretty much all cash. It's investors'
It's their
money.
capital, yeah.
Exactly. Which
capital,
you know better than anyone.
Yeah, it's investor
And
capital.
so these lenders are saying, well, wait a second, this is a good piece of land. We are potentially willing to take a small loss or, in some cases, a bit of a larger loss or do structuring on a deal.
But in some cases, they're taking over. They're just taking it over.
Exactly.
And they've gone
That's the
from
credit bid.
Gone from lender to owner developer.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
And when you look at large, real estate private equity firms, one of the largest in Canada, of course, they have this fully functioning, vertically integrated, they're a lender, they're a developer, they're an asset manager.
They're a property manager, they're an owner, they're a landlord, they're everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So they can take it over and they have the ability to work it out.
Now, liquidity is becoming a bit of an issue now because if you have too many of those, you're going to get short of cash at a certain point. But we're seeing that in the marketplace. Okay, so the beauty of this is you see the very beginning of everything, and you watch it rise up, and you watch. And so, one of the things I wanted to tell the audience is that it's common, very common. We get a lot of comments. Like you can't believe the number of comments we get in YouTube. We get in podcasts. We get sometimes we get 800 comments on a video, and that was the most, but that's a lot. That's too many. I mean, it's ridiculous. 800 comments on one video. But there's sort of a consistent pattern of people saying, "Yeah, it's these fucking greedy developers." Okay, it's like a consistent pattern. You get that a lot, and I take a whole different. I take what I hope is a holistic thought process on that, because I'm also just as mad at the fucking government who's got the highest development fees in the world, okay? Yeah. Their most rapacious taxation model you could ever imagine, the most incredibly long time from you to start to think about building something to getting the final approval. What's that, 3 years in a lot of cases?
Yeah, I mean, the basic assumption is 24 months, but I think RBC did a study and they said it was average of 36 months.
Yeah, come on. That's crazy. In Texas, you show up at some empty land in Texas and you say, hey, can we build here? And he says, sure, sonny. You got money? You can start building next week. We don't give a shit, okay? You got to bring in the water. You got to bring in the power. But we ain't doing anything with this land, so get busy. That is so different. That's what Peter Gilligan said when he started building in the States. He says, I've got to fight like a tiger to provide housing in Ontario.
Yeah.
In Texas and Alabama and Mississippi and Florida, they just say, "Yeah, let's go. Let's get this built." Okay, how can we help you? Can you imagine how can we help you coming from anybody in the city of Toronto? No one says how can we help you. They're basically saying just be patient while we fuck you. Okay, is really what's going on. All right. So I can say that. It's hard for other people to say it, but I can say that.
That's fair. There's a lot of good people in the city of Toronto, but it's the structure and the process. It's the system.
And there's also some shit people. But yeah, there's some good people everywhere. There's good people everywhere. There's bad people everywhere. That's absolutely true. But a lot of the viewers like to crap all over the developers to think, because like you said they're sort of the maestro of the whole thing, right?
Yeah, they're the quarterback. They're the maestro. They're the first one to point at.
They're the easiest ones to point at. They're the easiest ones to blame. But obviously we can look at some other villains in the piece. Okay.
Yeah.
We got the which we covered, the ridiculous development fee increases. Like you were talking about one where in residential housing, like single family. So there was a space of time there was like, what was the increase in development fees over?
In the year 2001, the single family housing development charge was, I think, roughly around $1,300.
$1,300,
yeah. And today it's $137,000. So it was a 10,000% increase.
Jesus Christ, that is just
And in that
shocking.
same time period, a one-bedroom multi-unit condo went up 3,000%. So, not as much as 10,000, but still we're talking 3,000%.
So we think about this development fee insanity, which actually some municipalities are like shocked by the fact nobody's building anything anywhere. Okay, because we talked about that too. Like there literally is nothing being built. Is that fair? There's some institutional.
Very few.
There's some government buildings are getting built, and yes, there's cranes in the sky finishing, right?
Yeah,
but there's nothing new.
And you got to remember, Ron, now that there's less projects happening, you have, say, a formwork or a mechanical team. Their teams are finishing projects, so they're taking their best people and going to the other project they need to finish, and they're finishing them even quicker. And so some developers are saying, whoa, hold on a sec. We actually assumed it would be done on this date. You're going to be ahead of schedule 6 months.
Because you're pouring your best people from, because there's no startups. There's nothing starting. Pour your best people into getting this one finished. Okay.
Especially formwork. So formwork, at one point, there's only so many of them in the city. So they were spreading their teams thin, and they were going to do so many projects. Now they don't have any projects completing because, they're the concrete, right? So they're really the first ones to finish.
They call it slab, right? That's what they call it, slab.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're the first ones to finish. So they're the ones who slowed down the quickest. So, for example, formwork contracting, their cost used to be, we'll just use a rough number. It was as high as like $25 a square foot at some point. It's now $10 less.
Whoa, Jesus. Yeah. Okay. So because the trades aren't busy.
The trades aren't as busy.
And there's nothing coming. So
there's not as much coming. No, they're competing against the same project.
So the stuff that used to take 6.5 years or 7 years to finish we're going to see some stuff finish really quick.
Yeah.
Wow. So everything's going to be finished and then stopped. There'll be nothing new.
Exactly. And it's actually not a bad thing to be finished quickly for those who are building rental. Because rental, you have the greatest market risk when you start your construction to finish your construction, but you have no revenue. Right, you have to stop, and then you have to release it out,
and you have to then fill it up because you don't have pre-sales. It's not like a condo. You've got to actually rent the whole place out. So so if you're at speed, it helps you. It helps because you're paying the interest on the loan. So then we would beat up on the developers, beat up on the land sales guys, all the people who beat up on the people
the
who
landowners.
Sold the land. People beat the shit out of the landowners. Like, look at you, bastard! You bought that parking lot for next to nothing in '79, and now you're millions and millions mad at them. So we're mad at the developers. We're mad at the land sales people. We're mad at the old owners of the plots of land that got sold for multiple more. We're sure as hell mad at the government of the city who just raised development fees through the roof. So Toronto's got like $4 billion as a savings account from, and I guess they might
development charges.
They might be development charges because they charge so much and they did so many projects. So now maybe they're borrowing against it, right? Because I think they have to. They can't just use it for general revenue, right?
Yeah, you can actually find this public information, and Mike Moffat, the economist, actually brought this to light to give him credit. He showed that at one point there was roughly $12 billion of unused development charges just sitting in most of these municipalities. In the city of Toronto, I believe it was somewhere around $4 to $5 billion.
Wow.
And then we've been told by certain consultants that they actually will borrow against this line,
because it's sitting there.
Because it's sitting there because their hands are tied, which how they can use that money specifically. So they don't necessarily spend it, but take lines of credit out against it in order to spend it on different things. So
different other projects.
This is what we've been told. Of course, I am not a
you're not digging into their books. I get that. So here's the fascinating part, and I talked about earlier, and it really struck both of us how true this was. We get a lot of commentary again in the comments from all kinds of posts that we do that, hey, don't be stupid. If you reduce the development fees, the developers will just take it all as profit. Okay. Now you and I know that's crazy because they're out of business. So if they could find a way to get the development fees down, they could at least have a shot at building something. I mean, after all, they're builders. Okay. When there's nothing to build, they're effectively done. Their business is finished.
It's transactional.
It's exactly. So here's the news to everybody, and Jeremiah will confirm this. No, they will take all the reduction and offer it to the public, right? I mean, that they need the reduction to be able to get prices down.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the market is actually doing what it should, and it's directing demand to find where that price is. So, most people are correct in understanding that, if there was a bull market here and they were able to get rid of taxes, yes, they could increase fees. But you also have to remember that most of these developers are taking on $200-300 million construction loans, and they're personally signing for this as risk. Most developers, in my case and what I've seen, are not looking to squeeze every last dollar. They're looking to hit a profit margin, build it, and move on. And that's what happened in most of the markets. Now, there obviously are examples of, gregarious situations where people took advantage. But the point is now, when it comes to development charges, people assume that this cost will not be passed along to the buyer. The difference is that, there are mechanisms in which you could say, charge that and then bring it back as a credit at the end. So no one actually pays for it if the end user moves into it. So there's a mechanism you could do. And there was a coalition that went out and did pledges for this and build another one. But I think the fact of the matter now is that even if a developer or a builder wanted to go and build something and sell it, they wouldn't be able to at a certain price. So that baseline price has decreased.
To come down.
It has to. And so when you look at the average condo building being built downtown Toronto, about 30% of the cost is taxes. And so if overnight you took something that was, $100 and you took 30% off of it and you can now sell it for $70, would there be buyers at that? There might be. It might even have to go lower. So that means that, perhaps this is the point in time which we can get rid of these upfront costs, which cause developers to raise prices every time the taxes come in place. And so therefore, you would actually be able to move back from that tax and actually create that tax savings for the actual end user.
Let's talk about that for a second, because we had this fantastic example of out of nowhere. First of all, the city of Vaughan said, hey, you know what? We'll just reduce these development fees by 80%.
Mississauga,
and then Mississauga follows suit because both of those municipalities noticed, nobody's building anything. It's completely dead, okay? And we don't like that. We want our communities to keep growing, okay?
And you even notice after those announcements, there wasn't a lot of things built.
No, screw all that. Nothing happened, okay? Yeah. So, but the fascinating thing to me is that you have to raise the question of, okay, so you could drop those fees 80%. Why were they so high in the beginning? I mean, you obviously didn't even need the 80%, but let's explore it a little farther, because you and I have the same sort of take on this. Nobody likes property taxes. Everybody hates paying their property taxes. That's the universal truth. Oh, property taxes went up. I'm so pissed off. I've been living here for 20 years. It gone up this much time. Well, you sort of got the use of the services for 20 years, buddy. So then we have the development fees, which is the opposite. We've got the development fees where the buyer, who's a young buyer or any buyer, they're fronting all the taxes. I mean, they are, and this is the wild part, they're mortgaging the taxes. So if the extra tax on a condo is $98,000, they're now paying interest on it because that was part of their purchase price. So why the hell would you mortgage an extra $98,000 to pay the city. That makes no sense. That's literally crazy. You should pay correct property taxes. I know everybody hates property taxes. I know, folks. Yes, you all hate it. There's the comments are coming in now. People are telling me, you fat bastard, where property taxes are too high, son of a bitch. Okay, I know they're coming, but let's face facts. What sense? Because these young people who are buying these homes, who are putting a mortgage on to pay this massive development fee, are also going to pay property tax as well. So it's literally insane. You're paying interest and principal on a loan to create a vast tax revenue when you closed on your unit, and then you're also going to pay property taxes forever. Okay, on a continuous increase basis. Wouldn't it make more sense just to transfer that to, like you were mentioning, they do this in the States. If there's a new development and it requires higher property taxes, they just tell you, look, for the rest of the city, it's going to be X. But in your area, because you're new, it's going to be X plus 20%.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make more sense?
Yeah, that's what they do quite a bit in certain areas of the U.S. And to explain, I think, in more clear terms, if you have, say, on $1 million property, you have $300,000 of taxes, and of those $300,000, this is say a condo downtown Toronto. Of those $300,000, $150,000 is maybe development charges and municipal taxes and parkland levies, right? So if you took $150,000 and you have to pay out the cash for that, what does that cost you on a mortgage basis for the next 30 years amortized?
Another $300,000.
Exactly. So if you were to take that cash out and actually allow the end user to have that savings, and you charged that back in form of increased property taxes over the 30 years, then it's a net win for everyone, because it's a less, instead of the bank making all the interest, and sorry to all your, the banks.
No, I think the banks are probably okay with it, actually.
They're
but
okay.
Anyway, yeah.
But, the point is that instead of the developer, the city, and the end user all getting in fights over these taxes, the bank is losing out on their interest rate cost. The taxes are increasing over those 30 years, of course, but we're talking minimal increases, and the developer is able to lower the prices in order to actually get it sold, right? So it could be a win-win in that regard.
And also we have to really address the fairness issue. Like, what sense does it make to say to people who want to buy a home now at their stage of life, let's say they're 35, hey, we want you to pay through the nose, pay an incredible amount of development cost, and we also want you to pay property taxes, even though the guys who've been sitting like 6 blocks away in the old neighborhood have been sitting there for 20 years. They've been paying property taxes and using this. You just showed up. You just got here. Okay. You haven't used any of the city's services per se. I mean, you might be from another part of the country. You haven't used any of the services. They've been using it for 20 years, appropriately paying for it. So why do you need to front load your cost to say that, yeah, we're going to charge you this extra $150,000 and then you're going to put it into a mortgage and we're going to charge you $300,000 of interest. It doesn't make sense, really. It's a fairness issue.
Yeah, it came from a long time ago where the city started to say, well, growth pays for growth. So if you want to come in, you want to build, then you have to pay for your own growth, which, okay, understandably, that makes sense. But when you dig into it, it's a little more nuanced. Because,
well, if you got $4 billion sitting in an account, I guess you couldn't even spend it on your growth. You couldn't find it. You were just overcharging. So because you couldn't find the thing to spend it on, it's still sitting there.
Well, that's the thing is, it seems as though, and maybe I'm speculating a bit, but the city seemed to have this piggy bank that they saw grow every year because there was so much growth. So then they just said, okay, let's increase the cost of those taxes, every 12 years. So whenever they saw that. And the funny thing is that, all the public didn't realize this, but in the background, developers, I'm selling a piece of land, 300,000 square foot tower site downtown. And, the developer is coming in, they're running their pro formas. They're trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to sell this for? How long is it going to take? What are my hard costs going to be, et cetera? And they come to a residual value. So, my revenue minus my costs, there's a profit. And almost every developer would always have the same profit margin. And this is, people don't believe me when I say this, but they always solve to this profit margin. That's what they start with first. And what happened is that then the city comes in midway through a process of I'm selling a piece of land, and 30 days into the process, we're getting close to bids, the city has an announcement, oh, by the way, we're increasing development charges by 48.8%, which this is a true story, happened.
That's John Tory. John Tory did that, yeah.
Exactly.
One day, boom, it happened.
Boom, it happened. And then all of a sudden, all the developers are sitting there going,
what?
Okay. Yeah. So then they come back to their pro forma, they look at their entire equation, and they say, well, I guess we can sell for a little bit more. I guess I can take slightly less profit margin. And I guess, maybe I could try and get more density here, right? So it's like this equation of trying to figure out what can I do to actually make this work? Because the landowner's sitting there and, maybe he's a guy who's owned this for 30 years and he's saying, well,
I want my piece.
I want my piece. Nothing's changed, right, for me.
Yeah.
And so, that is what it is. And then, people are starting to figure out, well, rather buyers are trying to figure out, how do I actually pay for that? So they're just increasing the cost. And when they come to market, literally this has happened so many times, they're just saying, well, I have to sell at X dollar now. They push the boundary. And in the bull market, they were pushing the boundaries continuously.
And the boundaries kept getting sold.
And why were they pushing the boundaries? Because their cost, their construction cost and their taxes, everything kept increasing. If you look at a more stable period in the market, which was around 2012 to 2015, the price increases in that period were not nearly as drastic as 2016 and onwards. And if you look at the development charges, the same thing was true. So,
right.
So there's not one person who is at fault for this period.
There's no one villain in this piece.
No.
I mean, look, the guy who sold the original land, that he's held on to it for 30 years. He wanted his piece of the pie. The people who bought the land, they're just developers. They want to build stuff. Okay, as you said, they had a standard pro forma, but then we had the city come in and raise the development fees through the roof. So the developers just had to keep adding that on. Then we had delays the city created on getting a project finished. So the developer had to estimate the cost, the longer time period of financing that whole thing, because they have to buy the land. Mm-hmm. They got to pay the interest. And then the interest rates just plain went up, like sometimes very significantly at some point.
2018.
Okay, sure. And then we had we're not going to pretend the construction people are innocent in this thing. Like the people who build the stuff, the people who sell the concrete, the people who sell the rebar. We're not going to pretend that they're just innocent people in all this.
Yeah,
they made some money too. Absolutely.
The materials, that was all, commodities markets, but the actual trades and the unions and all that sort of labor, they were following the costs in the market. So they're renegotiating their contracts as well, all the way up too.
So it's literally everybody taking a bite out of this thing. And in the end,
because there was demand. In
the end, somehow the consumer, the buyers of the units, we're talking condos now, they just kept paying higher prices. And respectfully, no one was holding a gun to their head. Okay, like when you purchased a property at 600 a square foot in 2018, and all of a sudden you thought paying 1,400 a square foot was fine, nobody threatened you. Okay, I mean no. you weren't forced to do it, and you clearly didn't do the math because rents didn't go up that much. They went up. Okay, fine. You were making wrong assumptions about how much this is going to all run up. So. We're not mad at investors because they are getting people who bought those units to rent, they're getting absolutely destroyed now, totally and utterly destroyed. Their life savings are being wiped out. Any profits they made on other condo units are being wiped away. We're watching it in real time happen every day.
They also made a lot of money in projects too.
But they're on the hook now.
Yes,
at the end of the day,
exactly.
They're on the hook now.
Everyone was part of it. There are examples of developers who, they sold a project in, say, 2015 at $700 a square foot, and then they got delayed by the city or something in construction. So then they actually hand the building over to the buyers in 2019, and all of a sudden the market's worth $1,000 a foot. So the funny part is all the investors together made more profit than the developer who actually finished the project.
Sure, that could happen. Absolutely.
That happened as well too. So there's examples either way. Yeah. The system was at fault. The system of how we financed projects, how it was sold as pre-construction, you needed to hit that level. Additionally, the system of the city not giving zoning out and being extremely difficult to get your entitlements and your zoning and towers. So then all of a sudden builders are, like I'm selling this downtown site. I'm getting 17 offers for a $30 million plus site, right? Like, ends up selling for close to 50 million. Like that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of people bidding on that. And that means that they're all bidding on something that's extremely scarce. And why is it scarce? Because it's very hard to find parcels of land big enough to build within the parameters the city wanted.
The city gives you, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that was the problem, is the whole system was set up to go through this, basically to a point to fail at some point.
Endless upward spiral till it broke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, a more balanced market, when you look at like Manhattan, you look at these different areas, it's okay, well, we got to build it first, then we got to finish it, then we got to sell it, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. They have to finish it.
They have to finish it. Yeah.
So it's a different approach than taking pre-construction deposits.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're here. And just to cut to the chase, the fuckery has ensued. Okay, we're here. We're where we're at. Okay,
it's a great verb.
We're where we're at in the market. All right. So what we know that there's going to be value destruction. We know that there's going to be some. You've experienced the receiverships. You've sold the receiverships. We know that there's
power sales.
We know that there's projects where 20% of the buyers refuse to close, 30% of the buyers refuse to close. Maybe there's a unicorn at 40% of the buyers refuse to close. And this is really turning some of these builders into developers into I'm a developer, but now I'm also a landlord because they got to rent out those units that they had to buy to close. They had to get an inventory loan and close. We've talked about some of those things before. So there's still excess inventory. There's still overpriced properties that are going to continue. I'm one of the only guys who've always said that, and I could be wrong. I could be absolutely wrong. There's going to come a day where 75% refuse to close on a finished project, and hell's a popping at that point. I mean, like that's because then you got banks involved with $300 million, $50 million worth of financing.
And the developer hands the key back,
and the key to the bank, and then what happens then? So that hasn't happened yet, but we'll see.
No.
And by the way, folks, just remember this: always, 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 the bank's not in trouble. The bank is never in trouble. There's one thing about the big six banks in Canada. I just want you to take it for a certainty: the banks will always be fine. Now, that may be a little less profitable, but
I mean, they wake up and they make $1 billion opening.
Yeah, so they're going to be fine. Anybody who thinks the banks are going down, I just relentlessly have to tell you the answer is no. They're not going down. Okay. Now, they could have some problems. They could have some issues. Like if there's a major financial problem in the world, if Britain's bond market, the UK's bond market fails one day.
The US bond market.
Well, we got all that stuff. So, and all of a sudden,
you have a black swan event.
Fixed rates go to 9%, 10%. Okay. Yeah. And yes, there could be that, but I'm not here to try to advise you about really difficult, unusual, crazy things, which could happen. The probability is not zero that could happen. So the Brits or the Japanese or something goes really wrong with their bond market. It's possible. But let's put it this way. We're in what we're in right now. How long is it going to take before we see a new condo project sell to completion and brand new condos start pre-sale sell to completion? There's none of it now. It doesn't exist today. Mm-hmm. But is there ever going to be a point in the next, is it 27, 28, 29, 30? Someday there'll be, we opened the sales office and we sold 70% of it. When is that going to happen?
It's a great question, Ron. I honestly don't know. I do know one thing, that if we look at the development land market and you look at what has happened in the past with different assets, industrial land, for example, in 2008 was really the top of the industrial land market before the Great Financial Crisis. When that Great Financial Crisis happened in the US, it really affected industrial real estate in Canada because it's all commerce driven. There's a lot of American companies using for warehousing, logistics, and of course manufacturing, right, that potentially sold into the US. So that market at the time, let's say it was about $900,000 an acre for industrial land. In 2009, that market started correcting, and it corrected and did not come back to those values until really 2017.
That's like 8 years.
Roughly 8 years. Yeah. So the industrial land market, the dollar volume amount, the number of transactions really started coming back 2015. But again, it really just didn't get there until 2017. Then it took off like gangbusters. But, if you look at that cycle period for land, 7-8 years, we're now, roughly 3 years into our correction. Potentially, we do have another 4 to 5 years, left
2030,
for the full correction.
Yeah.
But that's for values to get back to where they are, right? Because as I mentioned, development land today is trading somewhere around 40 to call it 60% from highs. And we're 71% down on dollar volume amount from our highs in 2022. And we're about 63% down from number of transactions. And that means just most of the transactions are smaller now. There's more of them that are smaller than the larger ones.
So I guess I should always remember that if we have an event where in late 2027, early 2028, where a pre-construction condo sells through and they can start the project, it ain't going to be finished for 5 years. So that's something I've got to keep in my head too. So the condo market in terms of pre-sale can start to come back a little bit earlier. But I think, hey, one thing's for sure, it's not the fall. Like, it's not going to be the fall of this year. It ain't going to be the spring of next year.
No.
And that's, I think, what we need to tell. That's what I have to tell everybody. If you're looking at the condo market as a buyer or or you've got a pre-construction closing coming, you can't think it's going to be fine in April next year. I mean, it's not logical.
Probably not.
Not logical. Okay. I know I'm not trying to get Jeremiah to beat up his own business, but I do it with my own business every day because I think we're trying to achieve realism of what markets look like. And you've given
I don't sell condos.
No, but you've given a great example. That was basically an 7-8 year run.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's normally how cycles work. When I was in 1990, the residential resale market died in 1990 and prices fell, and it didn't come back to life even on a sales volume basis or just even start to move prices up till late 1995 and 96 it got going again. So that's a 6-year integrum, and people were still coming to Canada. Like, there were still people coming to Canada and people coming to Ontario and people coming to Toronto, and it just didn't take off. That's the truth. Okay. And by the way, on an inflation adjusted basis, you didn't achieve 1989 pricing until about 2012, 2013. So, that was a long, long time, right?
Wow.
It's a long time.
Yeah. Inflation adjustment's never fun.
Never fun when you adjust for inflation.
We buy everything with Bitcoin.
Jeremiah, thank you. It's a great episode. And I want everybody to remember, you want to understand how real estate starts. That's what Jeremiah does. He starts everything, and he's telling you the truth, and he sees things earlier, and he understands the cycle. So thank you very much, Jeremiah. It's a great episode. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me, Ron.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
Amazing.
All right, we're out.
If you like the pod, well, don't just sit there. Go to YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all the other ones and like the pod. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep being angry at mortgages and swearing about mortgages. Angry Mortgage could use your support.